My daughter-in-law smashed a cake into my face on my 73rd birthday, while my son laughed as I hit the floor. They said it was just a joke, a bit of family fun. But the next morning, the ER doctor took one look at my X-ray and immediately called 911. Before I tell you how a simple birthday party turned into a crime scene, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I am Bernard Cross, 73 years old, and for 40 years I worked as a union negotiator in Detroit. I sat across the table from corporate sharks and corrupt officials, men who would smile while they stabbed you in the back. I thought I knew what a predator looked like. I thought I could spot a lie from a mile away. But it turns out the most dangerous people in my life were not sitting across a boardroom table. They were sitting at my dining room table eating my food and spending my money. It happened on a Tuesday evening. The air in my house felt heavy, though I could not quite place why. My son Patrick and his wife Megan had insisted on throwing me a small birthday celebration. I told them I did not want a fuss. At my age, birthdays are just reminders that the clock is ticking. But Megan insisted. She said we needed to make memories. She was right, of course. We certainly made memories that night, just not the kind she intended. I was sitting at the head of the mahogany table my father had built by hand. Patrick was to my right, scrolling through his phone as he always did. He is 38 years old, but sometimes he acts like a teenager trapped in a man's body. He did not look at me. He did not ask how I was feeling, even though I had been complaining of dizziness and numb fingers for weeks. He just stared at that glowing screen, his face illuminated by the blue light, muttering about odds and spreads. I knew he was gambling again. I knew he was in debt, but I did not know how deep the hole was, or that he was planning to use my body to fill it. Then Megan came in from the kitchen. She is 32 with a smile that shows too many teeth and eyes that never seemed to blink enough. She was holding a large cake box. The cardboard was white and pristine. She set it down in front of me with a flourish. "Happy birthday, Bernie," she said. Her voice was too high, too sweet. It grated on my ears like metal on metal. I looked at the box. I expected her to open it, to cut a slice, to sing the song. That is what families do. But Megan did not reach for a knife. She looked at Patrick. It was a signal. I saw Patrick lift his phone, the camera lens pointed directly at me. The little red recording light was blinking. "Get ready, Dad," Patrick said, a chuckle bubbling up in his throat. "This is going to be viral." I started to stand up. I wanted to ask what was going on. I wanted to tell him to put the phone away, but I never got the chance. Megan ripped the lid off the box. Inside was a heavy, dense chocolate cake. Before I could process the density of it, she lunged. It was not a playful smear of frosting. It was a violent, calculated strike. She gripped the cake with both hands and slammed it into my face with the force of a linebacker hitting a quarterback. The impact was shocking. It was not soft. It did not squish. It felt like I had been hit with a brick wrapped in velvet. I heard a sickening crunch in the center of my face. A sharp electric bolt of pain shot from my nose into my brain, blinding me instantly. My head snapped back with such violence that my neck cracked. The force threw me off balance. My chair tipped backward. I flailed my arms trying to grab the table, the tablecloth, anything to stop the fall, but my fingers were numb and useless. I went down hard. The back of my head slammed against the oak floorboards. The room exploded into a kaleidoscope of white light and darkness. For a moment, I could not breathe. My mouth and nose were packed with thick, cloying frosting and sponge. I gasped, sucking sugar and crumbs into my windpipe. I coughed, choking, rolling onto my side, trying to clear my airway. The pain in my face was a pulsating hammer. My nose was definitely broken. I could feel the warm gush of blood mixing with the cold icing running down my chin and onto my shirt. I lay there curled in a fetal position on the floor of the house I had paid for, the house where I had raised my son. I waited for the hands. I waited for them to rush to me. I waited for the apologies, for the panic, for someone to say, "Oh my God, are you okay?" But no hands came. Instead, I heard laughter. It was a wet, ugly sound. Patrick was laughing. He was laughing so hard he was wheezing. "Did you get that?" Megan asked. Her voice was breathless, not from exertion, but from excitement. "I got it," Patrick gasped. "Oh man, the way he went down. That was classic." Look at the comments. They are already rolling in. I wiped the frosting from my eyes, my hand trembling uncontrollably. My vision was blurry, swimming in and out of focus. I looked up at them from the floor. They loomed over me like giants. Patrick was still filming, moving the phone closer to get a better angle of my humiliation. He zoomed in on the blood dripping from my nose onto my collar. "Help me," I croaked. My voice sounded weak, pathetic. I hated it. Megan looked down at me. She did not offer a hand. She gently kicked the sole of my shoe with her foot. "Oh, get up, Bernie," she said, rolling her eyes. "Don't be such a drama queen. It is just a cake. It is a prank. Everyone does it." "It is not a prank," I managed to say, spitting out blood and chocolate. "My nose. It is broken." "Stop acting," Patrick said, finally lowering the phone, but only to check the footage. "You are ruining the vibe. It was just a bit of fun. You are always so serious. This is why no one likes coming over here." He turned his back on me. He turned his back on his 73-year-old father lying bleeding on the floor to type a caption on his video. Birthday. Prank old man down. I realized then with a clarity that cut through the pain that I was entirely alone. I had been a negotiator for 40 years. I knew how to read a room. I knew when the other side had walked away from the table. My son and his wife had not just walked away. They had burned the table down. I rolled onto my knees. A wave of nausea washed over me. The room spun. It wasn't just the blow to the head. For weeks I had been having these spells, dizzy, confused. My hands would shake so bad I couldn't button my shirt. Megan told me it was just old age. She told me I was getting senile. She told me I was forgetting things. But as I pushed myself up from the floor, my arms trembling under my own weight, I felt a new sensation. Fear. Primal fear. This was not normal. The cake was too hard. The hit was too hard. The laughter was too cruel. This was not a mistake. This was an assault disguised as a party favor. I grabbed the edge of the table and hauled myself up. I swayed on my feet. My face felt like it was on fire. I grabbed a napkin and pressed it to my nose. It came away soaked in bright red blood. Patrick looked up from his phone, annoyed that I was still bleeding. "Go clean yourself up, Dad," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "You are making a mess of the floor. Megan just waxed that." I looked at him. I looked at the boy I had taught to ride a bike. The boy I had sat with in the hospital when he broke his arm in Little League. The boy whose college tuition I had paid for by working double shifts and skipping vacations. I looked for him in the eyes of this man standing before me, but he was gone. There was only a stranger with gambling debts and a cruel wife. I did not say a word. I turned and limped toward the bathroom. As I walked away, I heard Megan whisper loud enough for me to hear, but quiet enough to claim plausible deniability. "God, he is so fragile. One little bump and he falls apart. I told you he shouldn't be living alone anymore." I closed the bathroom door and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 2 tries to slide the bolt. I leaned against the door and slid down until I hit the cold tile. I sat there in the dark for a moment, just breathing, trying to keep the panic at bay. Then I stood up and turned on the light. The reflection in the mirror was horrifying. My face was a mask of chocolate and blood. My nose was swollen and crooked, deviating sharply to the left. Both of my eyes were already beginning to darken, the bruising spreading like spilled ink under the skin. I turned on the faucet. The water ran cold. I splashed it on my face, rinsing away the sweetness, leaving only the damage. I looked at my eyes in the mirror. The pupils were different sizes. Concussion. Definitely a concussion. But it was my hands that scared me the most. I held them up. They were vibrating. Not just shaking from shock, but vibrating with a tremor I could not control. And my fingertips. They were blue. Not bruised blue, but pale, oxygen-starved blue. I looked at my gums in the mirror. There was a thin, dark line along the base of my teeth. I remembered something from my days in the union. We represented factory workers, men who worked with chemicals and heavy metals. I remembered a case from 20 years ago. A man who had the same tremors, the same confusion, the same dark line on his gums. Arsenic, or lead, or thallium. The thought hit me harder than the cake. I was not getting old. I was not getting senile. I was being poisoned. My mind raced back over the last few months. The coffee Megan insisted on making for me every morning because my hands were too shaky. The special protein shakes Patrick brought over because he said I looked too thin. The way my vision would blur an hour after breakfast. The way my legs would feel like lead weights by noon. They were killing me. Slowly. Systematically. And tonight, they had gotten impatient. The cake wasn't a prank. It was a test. They wanted to see if I would break. They wanted to see if a fall would finish what the poison had started. I dried my face with a towel. The white fabric turned red and brown. I stared at the blood. I could go out there and scream. I could accuse them. But what proof did I have? A broken nose from a birthday cake? They would say I slipped. They would say I was confused. They would say I was a crazy old man who ruined the party. The police would come take a report and leave. And then I would be alone in the house with them again. No. I needed leverage. I needed undeniable proof. I opened the medicine cabinet. I grabbed a bottle of aspirin, but then I stopped. I didn't know if the seals had been tampered with. I didn't trust anything in this house anymore. I put the bottle back. I unlocked the door and stepped out. The hallway was dark. I could hear them in the living room, the clinking of glasses, the pop of a cork. They were opening the champagne. They were celebrating. I crept toward the living room entrance, staying in the shadows. I needed to know what they were saying. I can't believe he got up, Megan said. Her voice was no longer high and sweet. It was low and venomous. That cake was frozen solid in the middle. I put a rock in the center just to be sure. It should have knocked him out cold. He is tough, Patrick said. His voice was slurred. He was already drinking. The old man is like a cockroach. You step on him, and he just keeps scuttling. But did you see his eyes? He is out of it. The blend is working. It is taking too long, Megan snapped. We don't have time, Patrick. The loan sharks called again today. They want the $200,000 by the end of the month, or they start breaking legs. My legs. Don't worry, babe, Patrick said. I saw the look on his face. He is scared. He is weak. Tonight shook him up. Tomorrow you give him a double dose in the morning coffee. He is already dizzy. With a double dose, he will trip down those stairs and break his neck. It will look like a tragic accident caused by his declining health. We will have the insurance money in 30 days. My heart hammered against my ribs. A double dose. Tomorrow morning. They were putting a timestamp on my execution. I backed away silently. The floorboard under my foot gave a soft creak. "Who is there?" Patrick called out. His voice was sharp, aggressive. I froze. If they found me listening, if they knew that I knew, they wouldn't wait for the coffee. They would finish it tonight. They would say I fell in the bathroom. They would say I had a stroke. I forced a cough. A wet, hacking old man cough. I shuffled my feet intentionally, making a dragging sound. Just going to bed, I called out, making my voice sound tremulous and confused. My head hurts. I heard Patrick let out a breath. Just the old man, he said to Megan. Go to sleep, Dad. Don't wander around. I shuffled toward my bedroom, opened the door loudly, and closed it. I waited for 10 seconds, then locked it. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the doorknob. It wouldn't stop them if they really wanted to get in, but it would buy me noise and time. I sat on the edge of my bed. My head was throbbing so hard I could barely see straight. I looked at the clock. It was 9:30 p.m. I had until morning. I needed to get out. But I couldn't just leave. If I ran, they would chase me. They would spin a story that I had wandered off in a dementia-fueled haze. They would have the police looking for a lost, confused senior citizen. They would drag me back here and lock me in. I needed a reason to leave that they couldn't argue with. I needed a witness who wasn't family. I looked at my nightstand. There was a cup of coffee there from this afternoon. Cold black with a weird oily sheen on the surface. Megan had brought it to me at 4 p.m. I hadn't drunk it because I had fallen asleep. I reached out and picked up the cup. My hand shook, spilling a little. I poured the cold liquid into an empty water bottle I kept by the bed. I capped it tight and put it in my pocket. Evidence. Then I grabbed my wallet and my car keys. I didn't pack a bag. Packing a bag looks like running away. I needed to look like I was in distress. I waited until the house was silent. It took hours. I sat in the dark listening to the murmurs of my murderers turn into silence. I heard them go upstairs. I heard their bedroom door close. I waited another 30 minutes to be sure. I removed the chair from the door. I opened it. The hinges screamed in the silence of the night. I froze, waiting for a reaction. Nothing. I crept down the hallway. My socks slid on the hardwood. I reached the kitchen door. I had to go through the kitchen to get to the garage. I stepped inside. The moonlight was streaming through the window, illuminating the scene of the crime. The cake was still on the floor, a dark, smashed lump of chocolate and malice. They hadn't even cleaned it up. They had left it there for me to find in the morning, a reminder of my place in the hierarchy. I stepped over the mess. I reached the door to the garage. I turned the handle, locked. I fumbled with the deadbolt. My numb fingers wouldn't grip the little metal latch. I cursed silently. I used both hands, forcing my fingers to work, sweating with pain and fear. The latch clicked. "What are you doing?" The voice came from the shadows of the living room. I spun around, nearly losing my balance. Patrick was standing there in the dark. He was wearing his boxers and a t-shirt. He was holding a glass of whiskey. He hadn't gone to sleep. He had stayed up to drink. I stammered. My heart was in my throat. I was trapped. "I need ice," I said. "My nose. It won't stop bleeding." Patrick took a step forward. He stepped into the moonlight. His eyes were glassy. He looked at me with pure disgust. "There is ice in the freezer, old man," he slurred. "The garage is that way. You are going the wrong way. You really are losing it, aren't you?" He thought I was confused. He thought the poison and the concussion had made me forget where the freezer was. He bought the lie because he wanted to believe I was broken. Yes, I muttered. Confused. Sorry. I turned away from the garage door. I walked to the freezer. I opened it. The cold air hit my face. I grabbed a handful of ice cubes. I didn't even put them in a bag. I just held them in my shaking hand. "Go to bed," Patrick growled, "and stop creeping around. You give me the creeps." I walked past him. I smelled the alcohol on his breath. I smelled the danger. I walked back toward my room. I heard him laugh softly as I shuffled away. He went back to the living room sofa. I heard him settle in. He was going to pass out there. I was back in my room. But I couldn't stay. I knew that. I waited 10 minutes. I heard the deep rhythmic breathing of a drunk man passing out. I didn't try the garage door again. It was too close to him. I went to the window. I live on the first floor. It is a ranch-style house. I opened the window. I popped the screen out. It fell into the bushes with a soft rustle. I climbed out. It was not graceful. I fell into the hydrangeas my late wife had planted. Thorns scratched my face, mixing with the dried blood. I crawled out of the bushes. I didn't go to the garage for my car. The garage door opener was too loud. It would wake him. I walked. I walked down the driveway, sticking to the grass so my footsteps wouldn't crunch on the gravel. I walked down the street. It was 3 a.m. The suburbs were dead quiet. I looked like a monster, a battered, bloody old man stumbling through the night. I walked for 4 blocks until I reached the main road. My head was spinning. My legs felt like rubber. I saw a set of headlights approaching. I waved my arms. It was a taxi returning from a late airport run. The driver slowed down. He rolled down the window. He looked at me with wide eyes. "Holy smokes, buddy," he said. "You look like you went 12 rounds with a truck. Do you need a hospital?" "Yes," I said, climbing into the back seat. "Take me to St. Mary's." "But not the main entrance. Take me to the side where the trauma bay is." "Why?" he asked, pulling away from the curb. "Because," I said, leaning my head back against the seat and closing my eyes. "I need to report a murder." "Whose murder?" the driver asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. "Mine," I said. We arrived at St. Mary's 20 minutes later. I paid the driver with cash I had stashed in my wallet. I walked into the ER. The triage nurse looked up. She gasped. She came around the desk immediately. "Sir, what happened?" she asked, guiding me to a chair. "I need a doctor," I said, "and I need a police officer. But not just any doctor. Is Dr. Larson on duty?" She looked surprised. "Dr. Larson is the chief of trauma. He is here, but—" "Get him," I said. "Tell him Bernie Cross is here. Tell him it is a union matter." It was a code phrase we used back in the day. Dr. Larson had been a union doctor before he moved to emergency medicine. He knew me. He knew I didn't cry wolf. 10 minutes later, I was in a private room. Dr. Larson walked in. He looked older, grayer, but his eyes were still sharp. He took one look at my face and his jaw tightened. "Bernie," he said. "Who did this?" I didn't answer. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the water bottle filled with the cold coffee. "Test this," I said. "For heavy metals, arsenic, thallium, lead." Larson looked at the bottle, then at me. He didn't ask questions. He didn't tell me I was imagining things. He took the bottle, handed it to a nurse. "Stat tox screen," he ordered. "Full panel." Then he turned back to me. "Let's get you to X-ray." The X-ray room was cold. The technician was gentle, but every movement sent spikes of agony through my skull. They took scans of my head, my face, my neck. Then Larson ordered scans of my wrists and long bones. "Why my wrists?" I asked. "Just checking something," he said grimly. Half an hour later, I was back in the room. Larson came in. He closed the door. He locked it. He put the films up on the light box. "Bernie," he said, pointing to the spider web of fractures on my cheekbone. "This wasn't a cake. This was blunt force trauma. You have a depressed fracture of the zygomatic arch. Your nose is shattered." "But that is the good news." "The good news?" I asked. He pointed to the X-ray of my wrist. There were thin, dense white bands running across the bone like rings on a tree. "These are called Mises lines or lead lines," Larson said. "They appear when bone growth is disrupted by heavy metal poisoning. You have 3 distinct bands, Bernie. That means you have been dosed significantly at least 3 times in the last 3 months. He turned to me. The talk screen on the coffee isn't back yet, but I don't need it to know what is happening. You are being poisoned. I nodded. I felt a strange sense of relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't senile. I was just dying. My son, I said, and his wife. They want the insurance money. Larson picked up the phone on the wall. He didn't dial security. He dialed 3 numbers. 911. This is Dr. Larson at St. Mary's ER, he said into the receiver. I have a confirmed case of attempted first-degree homicide and aggravated elder abuse. The victim is with me. The suspects are at large. Send a detective. Now. He hung up. He looked at me. You are safe here, Bernie, he said. We are going to lock this wing down. No one gets to you. I looked at my hands. The tremors were still there, but my mind was clearing. The fog of confusion was lifting, replaced by the cold, hard steel of resolve. Don't lock it down, I said. Larson looked at me confused. If you lock it down, they will know. I know, I said. They will run. They will destroy the evidence. They will lawyer up. What are you proposing? Larson asked. I sat up. The pain was still there, but I pushed it into a box in the back of my mind. I channeled the negotiator. I channeled the man who had stared down auto executives and mobsters. I am going to die, Larson, I said. Or at least I need them to think I am. I looked at the doctor. Admit me. Put me in the ICU. Tell anyone who calls that I am in a coma. Tell them the prognosis is bad. Tell them I might not wake up. Bernie, this is dangerous, Larson warned. They need to feel safe, I said. They need to get sloppy. Patrick is a gambler. When a gambler thinks he has won, he stops counting his cards. That is when you catch him. Larson hesitated, then nodded slowly. He understood. I will make the call, he said. But the police will be involved. Good, I said. Let them listen. 2 hours later, I was in an ICU bed hooked up to monitors that beeped rhythmically. My face was bandaged. I looked like a corpse. My phone, which the nurse had placed on the bedside table, lit up. It was Patrick. I didn't answer. Then the landline at the nurse's station rang. I heard the nurse pick it up. She had her instructions. I am sorry, Mr. Cross, I heard her say. Your father has been admitted. He is currently in a deep coma. The doctors say the head trauma caused a massive bleed. You should come, but you should prepare for the worst. I lay there, eyes closed, listening to the silence of the hospital. I imagined Patrick hanging up the phone. I imagined the look on Megan's face. They wouldn't be crying. They would be high-fiving. They would be thinking about the money. They thought the game was over. They thought they had won. But the game had just begun. And I was about to deal the final hand. The morphine drip was doing its job, dulling the sharp, jagged edges of the pain in my face to a low, throbbing hum, but sleep was impossible. The hospital room was bathed in the artificial glow of monitors, the rhythmic beeping counting out the seconds of a life my son had tried to steal. It was 3:00 a.m. In the outside world, good people were sleeping. In my world, the predators were just getting started. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. My fingers were still stiff, the blue tint from the oxygen deprivation slowly fading, but still present, a physical reminder of the poison coursing through my veins. I opened an app that appeared on my screen as a simple calculator. It wasn't a calculator. It was a secure gateway to a system I had installed 6 months ago, right after Patrick had borrowed $500 from my wallet and swore he hadn't touched it. I tapped the screen. The feed loaded instantly. The screen showed my living room in high-definition night vision. It was empty. I switched cameras. The kitchen. Empty. The hallway. Empty. Then I switched to the study, my sanctuary, the room where I kept my books, my union commendations, and my father's old tools. They were there. Patrick and Megan were not grieving. They were not pacing the floors worrying about the father who was allegedly lying in a coma with a brain bleed. They were celebrating. Patrick was sitting in my leather armchair, his feet up on my desk, a bottle of my 18-year-old scotch in his hand. He wasn't using a glass. He was swigging it straight from the bottle, the liquid spilling down his chin, staining the shirt he hadn't changed since the party. Megan was pacing the room, pulling books off the shelves and shaking them, looking for hidden cash or documents. Her face, illuminated by the desk lamp, was twisted in a rictus of greed and anxiety. I adjusted the volume on my phone, bringing the wireless earbud closer. Their voices came through crystal clear, transmitted by the microphone hidden inside the vintage smoke detector above the desk. "We are golden, babe," Patrick said, his voice slurred and heavy with unearned victory. "Did you hear the nurse? Massive bleed. Deep coma. Even if he wakes up, he'll be a vegetable. He won't remember a thing." "He better not," Megan snapped, throwing a hardcover book onto the floor. "If he wakes up and talks, we are finished. You heard him in the bathroom. He was lucid. He was asking for ice." "He was confused," Patrick countered, taking another long pull from the bottle. "He thought the freezer was the garage. The heavy metals are cooking his brain. Larson said it himself, lead lines on the bones. That takes months. By the time anyone puts it together, he will be in the ground, and we will be in the Maldives." Hearing them discuss my murder with the casual tone of a couple deciding where to go for dinner sent a cold spike of adrenaline through my system that cut right through the morphine. It wasn't just the callousness. It was the confirmation of the timeline. Months. They had been poisoning me for months. Every cup of coffee Megan had brought me with a smile. Every protein shake Patrick had insisted I drink for my strength. They had been feeding me death by the teaspoon. I watched on the screen as Megan stopped pacing and turned to Patrick. Her eyes were hard, devoid of any warmth. "We need the policy number, Patrick. Now. The loan shark called me while you were in the bathroom. He isn't waiting for the funeral. He wants the first installment by Friday. 20,000. I leaned closer to the screen. Loan shark. Friday. 20,000. The motive was sharpening into focus. "Tell Vinny to back off," Patrick growled, slamming the bottle down on my desk, leaving a wet ring on the wood. "Tell him the old man is as good as dead. The payout is coming. 500,000 in life insurance plus the house. The house alone is worth 450 in this market." "Vinny doesn't care about real estate projections," Megan hissed. "He cares about cash. If we don't pay him, he's going to come here. And if he comes here and finds out we are broke, he won't just break your legs, Patrick. He will break mine." I watched my son, the boy I had taught to fish, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, shrug, as if his wife's safety was a minor inconvenience. "Relax. We have the old man's emergency stash. He always keeps cash in the safe." Patrick stood up, swaying slightly, and walked toward the painting of the Detroit skyline hanging behind my desk. He pulled it away from the wall. Behind it was a wall safe. I watched, holding my breath, not because I was afraid they would open it, but because I was afraid they wouldn't. "Do you have the combination?" Megan asked, moving closer, her eyes hungry. Patrick laughed. It was a cruel, mocking sound. "He's so predictable. It's Mom's birthday. It's always Mom's birthday." He spun the dial. Right, left, right. The heavy steel door clicked. The handle turned. I allowed myself a grim smile in the hospital darkness. Patrick was right about one thing. I was predictable. I knew he knew the combination. I had let him see me type it in a year ago, pretending not to notice him watching over my shoulder. I knew that if he ever got desperate enough, he would come for the safe. And I had prepared a welcome gift. Patrick pulled the door open. He reached inside and pulled out a thick leather binder and a small metal cash box. "Jackpot," he whispered. He put the cash box on the desk and forced the lid open. It wasn't locked. Inside were stacks of bills, 50s and hundreds, about $5,000 in total. It was walking around money for me, but to a desperate gambler, it was oxygen. He grabbed a handful of bills and threw them into the air, laughing as they fluttered down around him. "See," he shouted. "We are fine. Vinny gets his taste, we get some breathing room, and then the insurance check clears." Megan didn't look at the cash. She was looking at the leather binder. She opened it. "What is this?" she asked. It was a ledger, a bank book, but not from our local branch. It was a passbook for a high-yield offshore trust account in the Cayman Islands. I watched Megan's face as she read the balance I had carefully forged on the last entry. $2 million, she whispered. Her knees actually gave out. She sank into the office chair, clutching the book like a holy relic. Patrick stopped laughing. He scrambled over to her, snatching the book. "What? Let me see." He stared at the page. His eyes bulged. $2.2 million, he stammered. "Since when?" "Where did he get this union pension fund settlements?" Megan read from the notes I had planted. "Consultations. Settlements." Oh my God, Patrick. He's been sitting on a fortune. He's been driving that piece of junk truck and wearing $20 shirts, and he's been sitting on $2 million. The anger on Patrick's face was terrifying. It wasn't joy. It was pure, unadulterated rage. He felt entitled to that money. He felt cheated because I hadn't given it to him sooner. That stingy old bastard, he spat. He watched us struggle. He watched us drown in debt. And he had this, he could have paid Vinny off 10 times over. He watched you gamble it away, Patrick, I thought. He watched you buy a new car when you couldn't pay rent. He watched you become a leech. But Megan was already turning the pages, her mind racing ahead. "Is it in the will?" she asked frantically. "Patrick, check the will. If this account isn't named in the trust, it goes into probate. The state will take a chunk. We need access now." She grabbed a sheaf of papers from the safe. It was the will, or rather the decoy draft I had left there. "Here," she said, scanning the document. "It says all assets currently held, but we need power of attorney to access an offshore account before he dies. If he dies without transferring it, it could be frozen for years." They looked at each other. The greed in the room was palpable, a thick, suffocating fog. The $5,000 on the desk was forgotten. The $2 million was the new target. "We need him to wake up," Megan said. "Just for a minute. Just long enough to sign." "He's in a coma," Patrick shouted. "Then we wake him up," Megan screamed back. "Or we forge it." "But we need that money, Patrick. If we don't get it, I'm leaving you. I'm not going down for this, if I'm poor." Patrick paced the room, running his hands through his hair. I could see the gears turning in his poisoned mind. "We go to the hospital," he said finally. "Tomorrow. We tell the doctors we need to see him. We bring the notary. I know a guy, Paulie the Pen. He can notarize anything for $500. We get Paulie to stamp a power of attorney document dated 3 days ago." Backdating Megan nodded. "Smart. We say he signed it before the accident." "Exactly," Patrick said. "We go in tomorrow. We play the grieving children. We clear out the safe, we clear out the offshore account, and then—" "Then what?" Megan asked. "Then we pull the plug," Patrick said. His voice was flat, cold. "We tell the doctors his quality of life is gone. We let him go." I closed the app on my phone. My hand was shaking, but not from the poison this time. It was shaking from a rage so cold it burned. They weren't just going to kill me. They were going to erase me. They were going to strip my legacy to the bone and then discard the husk. I lay back against the pillows. The pain in my face was irrelevant now. I had what I needed. I had the confession. I had the motive. I had the plan. I picked up the hospital phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. "Mr. Steele," a voice answered on the second ring. It was gravelly alert. James Steele didn't sleep. He was the kind of lawyer who considered sleep a billable hour lost. "Steele, it's Bernie Cross," I said. "Bernie, it's 3 a.m. Are you in trouble?" "I'm in the ICU," I said. "My son tried to kill me." There was a pause, then the sound of a pen scratching on paper. "Talk to me, Bernie. I need you to activate the kill switch," I said. "The blind trust protocol." "You're sure?" Steele asked. "Once I pull that trigger, the house, the accounts, the cars, everything goes into the holding company. They will be trespassing in their own home. Their credit cards will turn into plastic scrap. They will be destitute by sunrise." "Do it," I said. "And Steele?" "Yes, I need you to draft a new document, a power of attorney." "For whom?" "For me," I said. "I'm going to make them sign it. But they won't know what they are signing." I heard a low chuckle on the other end of the line. "You're going to play the old man card, aren't you?" "I'm going to play the whole deck, James." I hung up the phone. I looked at the ceiling tiles. I visualized the chessboard. They thought they had captured the king. They didn't realize they had just walked into a checkmate. I closed my eyes. I needed to rest. Tomorrow was going to be a busy day. My children were coming to visit, and I had to be ready to give them the performance of a lifetime. I sat on the edge of my bed, the doctor's note burning a hole in my pocket. The silence of the house was heavy, suffocating. It was no longer a home. It was a cage, and the door was unlocked, but the guards were awake. I looked at the clock. 3:14 now. a.m. If I stayed until morning, I was a dead man. I had heard them. The double dose. The tragic fall. My son wasn't just waiting for me to die. He was setting the schedule. I stood up. The room spun. The pain in my face was a living thing, a hot, throbbing pulse behind my eyes. I grabbed the dresser for support. My knees shook, not from fear, but from the poison. That damn metallic taste was in my mouth again. I didn't pack a bag. Bags imply a plan. Bags imply sanity. If they caught me with a suitcase, the game was over. I just took my wallet, shoving it deep into my pajama pocket. I took my keys, wrapping my fingers around the cold metal of the F-150 fob. I needed one more thing. I needed the weapon. The coffee. It was in the kitchen in that silver canister Megan kept on the counter. The special blend she ground just for me. If I could get a sample, I could prove it. Without it, I was just a clumsy old man making wild accusations. I opened my bedroom door. The hinges were well oiled. I had done that myself years ago, but the hallway floorboards were original oak. They sang if you stepped on them wrong. I stepped out. The hallway was a tunnel of shadows. The only light came from the street lamp, filtering through the living room blinds. I breathed shallowly, counting my steps. 1, 2, 3. Creak. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house. It came from under my left heel. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. From the living room, a shadow moved. The recliner squeaked. Patrick. He hadn't gone to bed. He was sitting up, guarding the exit. "Who's there?" His voice was thick, slurred, but aggressive. The voice of a man looking for a fight. I couldn't run. I couldn't fight. I had to act. I had to be the thing they despised most. I had to be the burden. I let my shoulders slump. I let my jaw go slack. I shuffled my feet, dragging my slippers across the wood. I leaned heavily against the wall, making sure my silhouette looked frail and confused. "Dad." Patrick stood up. He was holding a beer bottle. "What the hell are you doing up?" He walked toward me, looming large in the hallway. I squinted at him, letting my eyes lose focus. The, the bathroom, I mumbled, my voice trembling. I can't. Which way is the bathroom, Richard? I called him Richard. My brother's name. A brother who had been dead for 20 years. It was the perfect touch. Patrick stopped. He let out a sigh of pure disgust. I'm Patrick, you crazy old bat, he muttered. And the bathroom is the other way. You're heading to the kitchen. Kitchen, I repeated, looking around as if I had never seen the house before. I'm thirsty. Dry. So dry. I pointed to my throat. It wasn't a lie. The fear had turned my mouth to sandpaper. Patrick rolled his eyes. Jesus, you're losing it fast. Go get water, then go to bed, and stop stomping around. Megan's sleeping. He turned back to the TV, dismissing me. He saw a senile old man wandering in the dark. He didn't see the threat. I shuffled past him into the kitchen. The moonlight hit the granite countertops. There it was. The canister. I moved quickly now, masking the urgency with clumsy movements. I grabbed a paper napkin from the holder. I popped the lid of the canister. The smell hit me, rich, dark roast with that faint, underlying scent of bitter almonds I had learned to ignore. I scooped a handful of the grounds into the napkin. It was messy. Grounds spilled on the counter. Good. It looked like an accident. I folded the napkin tight, shoving it into my pocket next to the keys. Hurry up, Patrick yelled from the other room. Yes, yes, I called back. I turned the tap on, let it run for a second, then turned it off. I didn't drink. I shuffled back toward the hallway, but I didn't turn toward the bedroom. I turned toward the garage door. Hey, Patrick's voice was sharp. Where are you going now? I froze. My hand was inches from the doorknob. The car, I stammered. I left my glasses. You're not wearing glasses, Dad, Patrick said. He stood up again. I heard his heavy footsteps coming toward the kitchen. You don't even drive anymore. I could hear the suspicion in his voice, the gambler's instinct kicking in. He knew something was off. I didn't wait. I grabbed the deadbolt. It clicked loudly. Dad, Patrick's voice dropped an octave. Don't open that door. I threw the door open. The cold garage air hit me. I stepped into the darkness, slamming the door behind me and locking it. It wouldn't hold him for long, but it would buy me seconds. I ran. I didn't shuffle. I ran toward the old Ford truck parked in the corner. My truck, the only thing I hadn't let them sell. I heard Patrick hitting the door from the inside. Open this door, Dad! Open it! I fumbled for the lock. My numb fingers slipped. The keys clattered against the metal door. Come on, Bernie. Come on! I jammed the key in. The truck door groaned open. I hauled myself up into the cab just as the kitchen door burst open. Patrick stumbled into the garage, blinded by the sudden darkness. Dad! Get out of the truck! I shoved the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, that beautiful, loud V8 rumble that used to annoy Megan. Patrick lunged for the driver's side door. He grabbed the handle. I didn't look at him. I didn't look at the son I had raised. I threw the truck into reverse. The tires screeched on the concrete. The open door clipped Patrick, knocking him backward into the trash cans. I heard him shout a mix of pain and rage, but I didn't stop. I slammed the truck into drive. The garage door was opening. I had hit the remote on the visor the second the engine started, but it was too slow. It was only halfway up. I didn't care. I floored it. The top of the truck cab scraped against the rising wooden door with a deafening screech of metal on wood. Splinters rained down on the hood. I burst out onto the driveway, the truck fishtailing on the wet pavement. I saw the light in the upstairs bedroom flick on. Megan was awake. I didn't look back. I hit the street and accelerated, the old engine howling. My face throbbed in time with the pistons. My vision blurred, tears of pain and adrenaline mixing on my cheeks. I drove like a madman through the silent suburban streets. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see Patrick's sports car headlights cutting through the dark. But the street behind me was empty. I was out. But I wasn't safe. Not yet. I reached into my pocket and touched the napkin full of coffee grounds. It felt like a grenade. I wasn't just running away. I was running toward the only place where the truth mattered. "St. Mary's," I whispered to the empty cab. "Get me to St. Mary's." I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Fighting the dizziness, fighting the poison in my blood, driving through the night toward the light of the emergency room sign. It was the longest drive of my life. I stumbled through the automatic doors of the St. Mary's emergency room, the fluorescent lights above buzzing like angry hornets. The brightness hit my eyes like a physical blow, sending fresh spikes of agony through my shattered face. I must have looked like a walking nightmare. My pajamas were stained with garden soil and motor oil. My face was a mask of drying blood and chocolate frosting that had turned into a dark, crusty paste. I was clutching my side where the steering wheel had jammed into my ribs during my escape. The triage nurse, a young woman with tired eyes who looked like she had already seen too much, that shift stood up so fast her chair rolled back and hit the wall. "Sir," she said, her voice rising an octave. "Sir, I need you to sit down. I am calling a code." I waved my hand, a jerky, uncoordinated motion. My fingers felt like sausages, numb and useless. "I don't need a code," I rasped. My voice sounded like gravel grinding in a mixer. "I need Dr. Larson. Is he on tonight?" The nurse hesitated, her hand hovering over the red button on her desk. She looked at my face, trying to find a human feature amidst the swelling. "Dr. Larson is the chief of trauma," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "He is in surgery. I can get the on-call resident to—" "No residents." I barked, then winced as the effort sent a jolt of pain through my jaw. "Tell him Bernie Cross is here. Tell him it is a union matter. Tell him the negotiation is over." It was a phrase from 20 years ago, a private joke between me and the doctor, from when we shut down the assembly line during the strike of '98. He would know what it meant. He would know I wasn't here for a sprained ankle. The nurse stared at me for a second longer, seeing something in my one good eye that made her decide not to argue. She picked up the phone. 2 minutes later, the double doors to the trauma bay swung open. Dr. Eric Larson walked out. He looked older than I remembered, his hair more salt than pepper, but he still walked with the stride of a man who owned the hallway. He was stripping off surgical gloves, his eyes scanning the waiting room until they landed on me. He stopped. His professional mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing pure, unadulterated shock. "Bernie," he whispered. I tried to smile, but my lips split open again. "Hello, Eric, long night." He didn't answer. He was at my side in 2 strides, his hands gently gripping my shoulders, stabilizing me. He looked at my face, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the damage with clinical precision. "Get a gurney," he barked at the nurse, his voice snapping back into command mode. "Trauma room 1, now." They wheeled me back. The ceiling tiles flashed by overhead, a rhythmic blur of white and gray. I closed my eyes, fighting the nausea. The adrenaline that had fueled my escape from the garage was fading, leaving behind a cold, hollow exhaustion. I felt like a building that had been demolished, just a pile of rubble held together by skin and stubbornness. In the trauma room, they descended on me, nurses cutting away my shirt. Monitors beeped as they stuck electrodes to my chest. A blood pressure cuff squeezed my arm tight. Larson stood at the head of the bed, shining a penlight into my eyes. "Follow the light, Bernie," he said softly. I tried. My left eye tracked it. My right eye wouldn't move. "Blowout fracture," Larson muttered to a resident standing nearby. "Orbital floor is compromised." He turned to me. "Who did this, Bernie? Was it a mugging, a A carjacking. I reached into my pants pocket. It took 3 tries to get my hand inside. I pulled out the napkin. It was crumpled, stained with oil and blood, but the coffee grounds were safe inside. "Test this," I whispered. Larson took the napkin. He opened it carefully, sniffing the contents. He frowned. "Coffee grounds. Test it for heavy metals," I said. "Arsenic, thallium, lead, and test my blood for the same." Larson looked at me. For a moment I thought he was going to call for a psych consult. I thought he was going to say I was in shock, that I was delirious from the head injury. But Larson knew me. He knew I didn't panic. He knew I didn't make things up. He handed the napkin to a nurse. "Seal this," he ordered. "Chain of custody protocol. Send it to the lab. Stat tox screen. And draw a heavy metal panel on the patient. Rush it." He turned back to me. "While we wait for that, we need pictures. I need to see what is happening inside your head." The trip to radiology was a blur of motion and cold air. They transferred me onto the CT scanner table. It was hard and cold against my spine. The technician, a guy named Mike who looked like he played linebacker, was surprisingly gentle as he positioned my head in the cradle. "Hold still, Mr. Cross," he said. The machine whirred to life. A giant donut of plastic and metal spinning around my broken skull. I lay there in the hum of the machine alone with my thoughts. I thought about Patrick. I thought about the way he had laughed while I bled on the floor. I thought about the double dose they had planned for the morning. They hadn't just broken my nose. They had broken my heart. And now I was going to use the pieces to cut them. When they wheeled me back to the trauma room, Larson was waiting. He was standing in front of a bank of light boxes, looking at digital images on a high-resolution screen. The room was quiet. The nurses had stepped out. It was just me and him. Larson didn't turn around when I entered. He kept staring at the screen, his back rigid. "Eric," I asked. He turned slowly. His face was pale. In all the years I had known him through strikes and riots and industrial accidents, I had never seen him look like this. He looked frightened. He walked over to the bed and lowered the safety rail so he could sit next to me. "Bernie," he said, his voice low and serious. "I need you to listen to me very carefully." I nodded. He pointed to the screen. "This is your CT scan," he said. "See this?" He pointed to the left side of my face. The bone looked like a shattered windshield. "This is a comminuted fracture of the zygomatic arch and the maxilla," he said. "That means the bone didn't just break. It shattered. It was crushed." He looked at me. "You told the triage nurse it was a birthday cake." "It was," I said. Larson shook his head. "Bernie, a cake doesn't do this. A fist doesn't even do this. This kind of injury comes from a baseball bat, or a brick, or a car accident. The force required to crush the cheekbone like this is immense. If that cake had hit you an inch higher in the temple, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You would be in the morgue." I swallowed. The reality of his words settled over me. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a warning. It was an execution that missed. "But that is not what worries me the most," Larson said. He tapped a key on the keyboard. The image on the screen changed. It wasn't my head anymore. It was an X-ray of my forearm and wrist. "When we do a trauma scan, we often catch the extremities," he explained. "Look at the radius, the long bone in your arm." I looked. I saw the gray ghost of my own skeleton. But there was something wrong with it. Across the bone near the wrist joint, there were thin, bright white horizontal lines. They looked like bands of chalk drawn across the bone. "What are those?" I asked. "Those are called lead lines," Larson said. "Or Mises lines, depending on the poison." "Poison," I repeated. The word hung in the sterile air. Bone is living tissue. Bernie Larson explained, his voice clinical, but shaking slightly with suppressed rage. It grows constantly. When the body is exposed to high levels of heavy metals, arsenic, lead, thallium, the bone growth is disrupted. The bone becomes denser in those areas because the poison deposits there. It leaves a scar, a permanent record. He pointed to the first line, the one furthest from my wrist. This line here. This corresponds to about 3 months ago. That was the first dose. He moved his finger down to a second, thicker line. This one is about 6 weeks ago. A bigger dose. He pointed to the third line right at the growth plate. And this one is recent. Within the last week. He turned away from the screen and looked me in the eye. These lines don't lie, Bernie. You haven't just been feeling sick. You haven't been getting old. You have been systematically poisoned for a quarter of a year. The tremors, the vision loss, the confusion. Those weren't symptoms of aging. Those were symptoms of your nervous system slowly shutting down under a toxic load. I looked at my hands, the hands that had signed union contracts, the hands that had held my wife's hand while she died of cancer, the hands that had written checks for Patrick's college tuition. They were trembling, and now I knew why. My son, I whispered. Larson nodded. He didn't ask who. He knew. I have the preliminary tox screen back from the lab on your blood, Larson said. The coffee sample is still processing, but your blood work is conclusive. Your arsenic levels are off the charts, and there are traces of antifreeze ethylene glycol. That is what was causing the kidney pain you mentioned to the nurse. Antifreeze. They were feeding me antifreeze like a stray dog they wanted to get rid of. I felt a tear leak out of my good eye. It burned its way down my cheek, mixing with the dried blood. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure distilled grief for the life I thought I had. Bernie Larson said, standing up. I am a doctor. My job is to heal. But in this state, I am also a mandatory reporter. When I see evidence of a crime, especially abuse of a vulnerable adult, I have a legal and moral obligation to act. He put his hand on the phone on the wall. This isn't a medical case anymore, he said. This is a crime scene. You are the evidence. I looked at him. I saw the determination in his face. He was ready to bring the hammer down. Make the call, Eric, I said. He picked up the receiver. He didn't hesitate. He dialed 3 numbers. I lay back on the pillow and listened as he spoke to the operator. This is Dr. Larson at St. Mary's, he said. His voice cold and hard as steel. I need a detective immediately. I have a patient who has survived an attempted homicide. He paused, listening to the operator. No, he said. The suspect is not here. The suspect is at the victim's home, likely sleeping in the victim's bed. He looked at me as he spoke. Yes, I have proof. I have x-rays. I have blood work, and I have the victim. He is awake. He is lucid, and he is ready to talk. He hung up the phone. The police are on their way, he said. A detective is coming. Detective Miller, he's good. Good, I said. Larson walked over to the door and locked it. Until they get here, no one comes in, he said. I am listing you as a John Doe in the system. If your son calls, if he checks the registry, you aren't here. You are a ghost. A ghost, I thought. That is exactly what I needed to be. I looked at the X-ray on the screen again. Those white lines. They were a timeline of betrayal. A map of my son's hatred. Patrick wanted me dead. He wanted the insurance. He wanted the house. Well, I thought, closing my eyes as the exhaustion finally pulled me under. He was going to get the house. But he wasn't going to like what he found inside when the police kicked down the door. I was done being the victim. I was done being the fragile old man. I was Bernard Cross. I was a negotiator. and I was about to negotiate the terms of my son's surrender. The phone call was short. Dr. Larson didn't waste words. He gave the dispatcher the facts, his medical license number, and the code for a priority response. When he hung up, the silence in the room wasn't empty. It was heavy like the air before a thunderstorm. I lay there listening to the hum of the ventilation system. The pain in my face had settled into a dull, rhythmic throb, a constant reminder of the betrayal. But as I stared at the acoustic tiles on the ceiling, counting the little black dots, I felt something shift inside me. For 40 years, I had been a father. I had been a provider. I had been the man who fixed broken bicycles and paid for piano lessons. I had defined myself by who I protected. But lying there strapped to a trauma bed, I realized that man was dead. Patrick and Megan had killed him just as surely as if they had succeeded in stopping my heart. The man who remained was not a father. He was a negotiator. And in my line of work, you don't let emotions dictate the terms. You let the other side overplay their hand, and then you crush them. The sound of heavy boots in the hallway broke my concentration. The door opened. A man in a cheap suit and a loosened tie walked in, followed by a uniformed officer. He looked like he drank too much coffee and slept too little. Detective Miller. I knew the type. He was tired, he was cynical, but he was thorough. He stopped at the foot of the bed. He looked at my face, then at the X-rays still glowing on the screen. He let out a low whistle. "Mr. Cross," he said. His voice was gravelly. "I am Detective Miller. Dr. Larson tells me you had a hell of a birthday party." "It wasn't a party," I said. My voice was steady, colder than the air conditioning. "It was a hit." Miller pulled up a chair. He took out a notepad. He didn't treat me like a confused old man. He treated me like a witness. "Walk me through it," he said. I told him everything. I didn't embellish. I didn't cry. I gave him the timeline, the months of dizziness, the tremors, the incident with the cake, the conversation I overheard in the living room, the escape. Miller wrote furiously. When I got to the part about the antifreeze and the loan sharks, he stopped writing and looked up. "You heard them say they needed the insurance money by Friday?" he asked. "I did, I confirmed. $20,000 for the first installment." Miller looked at Larson. "Can we prove the poisoning?" Larson pointed to the screen. "The bone scans are definitive for chronic exposure. The blood work is pending, but the clinical presentation matches arsenic and ethylene glycol toxicity perfectly. And we have the coffee grounds. If the lab finds what I think they will find, you have a smoking gun." Miller nodded. He closed his notebook with a snap. "That is enough for probable cause," he said. "Attempted murder, conspiracy, elder abuse. We will pick them up tonight. We will have a squad car at your house in 20 minutes. He stood up, reaching for his radio. "No," I said. Miller stopped. He looked at me confused. "Excuse me, sit down, detective," I said. It wasn't a request. It was the tone I used when I told a CEO that his factory was staying closed until my men got their pension benefits. Miller hesitated, then sat back down. "If you arrest them tonight," I said, "what do you have?" "You have a sick old man and a coffee sample. Their lawyer will say I contaminated the coffee myself. They will say the bone lines are from environmental exposure from my years in the factories. They will say the conversation I overheard was a hallucination caused by my head injury. They will plead it down to assault. They will get 5 years, maybe less. They will be out in 2. Miller frowned. "Mr. Cross, the physical evidence is circumstantial without a confession," I interrupted. "And you won't get a confession tonight. Patrick is scared. He is desperate. If you kick down the door, he will clam up. He will lawyer up. So what do you want to do?" Miller asked, his eyes narrowing. "I want to catch them in the act," I said. "Not the act of killing me. They already tried that. I want to catch them in the act of burying me." I leaned forward, fighting the wave of dizziness that tried to pull me back down. They think I am in a coma, I said. They think I am going to die. What is the first thing a desperate debtor does when a wealthy relative is incapacitated? Miller smiled. A thin, grim smile. They try to access the funds. Exactly, I said. They need the money by Friday. They can't wait for probate. They can't wait for a will. They need immediate access. They are going to try to forge a power of attorney, or they are going to try to get me to sign something while I am out of it. I looked at Dr. Larson. Eric, I need you to admit me. ICU. No visitors until tomorrow morning. When Patrick calls you, tell him I am stable but unresponsive. You tell him there is swelling in the brain. You tell him the prognosis is uncertain. Larson nodded slowly. I can do that. It is not even a lie. You do have swelling. Then I continued, turning back to Miller. Tomorrow morning you let them in. You let them come to my bedside. You let them bring their notary. You let them put the pen in my hand. You want to entrap them, Miller asked. I want to give them the rope I corrected. If they try to force a signature, or if they present a forged document to the hospital staff to make medical decisions, that is fraud. That is criminal intent. That proves the motive for the murder attempt. It ties the money to the poison. Miller tapped his pen on his knee. He was thinking. He was calculating the risks. It is risky, Bernie, he said. If they realize you are awake, they won't, I said. I will be the best actor you have ever seen. I will be a vegetable until I am not. I took a deep breath. The pain in my ribs was sharp, but the fire in my belly was hotter. I don't just want them arrested, detective. I want them destroyed. I want there to be no doubt, no plea bargains, no way out. I want the jury to see them trying to rob a dying man. Miller looked at Larson. Can he handle this medically? Larson checked the monitors. His vitals are stable. We can manage the pain. As long as he doesn't exert himself physically, he is safe here. Miller looked back at me. He held my gaze for a long moment. He saw that I wasn't just a victim. He saw the negotiator. He saw the man who was willing to bet everything on one final hand. Okay, Miller said. We do it your way. But I will have plainclothes officers in the waiting room and one right outside the door. The room will be bugged. We record everything. Audio and video, I said. I want the jury to see their faces. Done, Miller said. He stood up and walked to the door. I will set it up with the hospital administrator, he said. We treat this as a sting operation. But Mr. Cross, yes. If you feel unsafe, if they touch you, if anything goes wrong, you give us a signal. We rush in. I lifted my hand. It was trembling less now. I will raise my hand, I said. When I drop it, you take them. Miller nodded and left the room. Larson moved to the head of the bed. He adjusted the IV drip. I am going to move you to the ICU now, Bernie, he said softly. I am going to sedate you lightly, just to help you rest. But I will lift the sedation 2 hours before they arrive. You need to be clear-headed. Thank you, Eric, I said. He looked down at me. His eyes were sad. I am sorry it is them, Bernie, he said. I know how much you loved that boy. I closed my good eye. I pictured Patrick as a child running through the sprinkler in the front yard. I pictured him graduating high school. I pictured him on his wedding day. I took those memories, wrapped them in a mental box, and locked it tight. The boy I loved is gone, I said. The man who is coming tomorrow is a stranger. And I don't make deals with strangers who try to kill me. Larson pushed a button on the IV pump. I felt the cold liquid enter my vein. The room began to swim. The edges of my vision turned gray. Rest now, Larson said. You have a big performance tomorrow. As the darkness took me, I didn't dream of my family. I dreamed of the bargaining table. I dreamed of the silence before the strike. I dreamed of the moment when the other side realizes they have lost, and the look of absolute terror in their eyes. I slept the sleep of the just, or perhaps the sleep of the executioner. When I woke, the room was different. I was in a glass-walled cubicle. Machines were humming all around me. A tube was taped to my face, feeding oxygen into my nose. My arm was strapped to a board to keep the IV lines straight. I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my brain. The clock on the wall said 8:00 a.m. Larson was there. He was checking my chart. "Welcome back," he said quietly. "Is everything ready?" I croaked. My throat was dry. Larson nodded. "Detective Miller is in the observation room next door. The cameras are rolling. Your son called 20 minutes ago. What did you tell him?" "I told him you had a seizure during the night," Larson said. "I told him you are in a persistent vegetative state. I told him if there are any legal affairs to settle, he should do it now, because you might not last the week." "Good," I whispered. "You gave him the deadline." "He is on his way," Larson said. "He said he is bringing his wife and a family friend." The notary, I thought. Polly, the pen. I closed my eyes. I practiced my breathing. Shallow, irregular, the breathing of a dying man. I let my jaw go slack. I let my hands lie limp on the sheets. I lay there for an hour, rehearsing the scene in my mind. I visualized Patrick walking in. I visualized the greed on his face. I visualized the moment I would open my eyes and watch his world burn. At 9:15 a.m., I heard voices in the hallway. They were hushed but urgent. I recognized the click of Megan's heels on the linoleum. I recognized Patrick's heavy, shuffling gait. I went limp. I let my eyes roll back slightly behind my lids. The door to my room slid open. "Oh God," Megan said. Her voice was thick with fake emotion. "Look at him. He looks terrible." "It is worse than I thought," Patrick whispered. "He sounds like a coffee percolator." A third voice spoke up. A scratchy, nervous voice. "Polly, is he, you know, with it?" Polly asked. "Because I can't notarize if he is dead." "He is not dead, you idiot," Patrick hissed. "He is just sleeping, or in a coma." "Whatever. Just get the papers ready. We need to do this fast before the doctor comes back." I felt them move closer to the bed. I smelled Megan's perfume. It was cloying, too sweet, trying to cover the scent of fear. I smelled Patrick's stale alcohol sweat. "He looks bad," Patrick said. I felt his hand touch my shoulder. It was a rough, shaking touch. Dad, can you hear me?" I didn't move. I didn't twitch. I kept my breathing ragged. "He is out cold," Patrick said. "Check his eyes," Megan suggested. I felt a thumb pull my eyelid up. I stared unseeingly ahead, fixing my gaze on a spot on the ceiling, letting my pupil stay dilated. It was a trick I had learned years ago to feign sleep, but now with the concussion, it was easy. "Lights are on. Nobody is home," Patrick said, letting my eyelid snap back. "Okay, let's do it," Megan said. "Polly, get the stamp." Patrick grabbed his hand. I felt the papers being slid onto the bed tray. I heard the uncapping of a pen. "Wait," Polly said. "I need to put his thumbprint on the logbook too, just in case anyone asks." "Just do it," Megan snapped. I felt Patrick grab my right hand. His grip was clammy. He shoved a pen into my numb fingers. "Okay, Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling with adrenaline. "Just a little autograph. Just sign the line for your loving son." He started to move my hand. He was guiding the pen toward the paper. This was it. The moment of the crime. The moment they crossed the line from waiting for an inheritance to stealing it. I waited until the tip of the pen touched the paper. I waited until I felt the pressure of his hand forcing mine to move. Then I stopped acting. My hand, which had been limp and pliable a second ago, turned into a vice. I clamped my fingers around Patrick's wrist. I squeezed with every ounce of strength the adrenaline gave me. I opened my eyes. I didn't look at the ceiling. I looked directly at Patrick. His eyes widened. His mouth fell open. He tried to pull away, but I held on. "Hello, son," I said. My voice wasn't a whisper. It was a growl. Megan screamed. It was a short, sharp sound of pure terror. Polly dropped the stamp. It clattered onto the floor. Patrick stared at me paralyzed. The color drained from his face, leaving him gray and pasty. "Dad," he squeaked. You're awake." "I am awake," I said. "And I have been awake for a long time." I sat up. The wires and tubes pulled at my skin, but I ignored them. I didn't let go of his wrist. I pulled him closer until his face was inches from mine. I could see the red veins in his eyes. I could smell the fear coming off him in waves. I squeezed harder. I felt the bones in his wrist grind together. "Did you bring the coffee?" Megan, I asked, looking past him to where she stood frozen at the foot of the bed. "I am dying for a cup." Maybe with a little almond extract this time. Megan's hands flew to her mouth. She backed away, hitting the wall. "He knows," she whispered. "Patrick, he knows." Patrick tried to yank his arm free. Let go of me." "Not yet," I said. "We haven't finished the transaction." I looked at the papers on the tray. Durable power of attorney. Transfer of assets. "You wanted my signature," I said. "You wanted the house. You wanted the offshore account." I released his wrist with a shove. He stumbled back, rubbing his arm. "You want it? Take it. But you take the rest of it too." "What? What are you talking about?" Patrick stammered. I looked at the mirror on the wall. I knew the camera was behind it. I raised my hand. "Now," I said. The door to the room burst open. It wasn't doctors, it wasn't nurses. It was Detective Miller, gun drawn, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Police Miller shouted, "Nobody move, hands where I can see them." Paulie hit the floor instantly, hands over his head. He knew the drill. Megan started to cry, a high, keening wail. She sank to her knees. Patrick just stood there staring at me. He looked at the police, then back at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The trap, the coma, the lie. You set us up," he whispered. "You old—" "Don't say it," Miller warned, stepping forward and spinning Patrick around. He slammed my son against the glass wall. "Hands behind your back." Now I watched as the cuffs clicked onto Patrick's wrists. I watched as another officer pulled Megan to her feet and cuffed her. I watched as they bagged the papers on the bed as evidence. Patrick looked over his shoulder at me as they dragged him toward the door. "Dad," he yelled. "Dad, tell them. It was a mistake, we were just trying to help." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had poisoned me. The man who had smashed my face. The man who had planned to bury me to pay his bookie. I leaned back against the pillows. I felt very tired, but very light. "I don't have a son," I said. The door closed. The room was quiet again. Dr. Larson walked in. He checked my monitors. My heart rate was high, but steady. "It is over, Bernie," he said. I looked at the empty space where my family had stood. "No, Eric," I said. "The criminal part is over. Now comes the eviction." I reached for the phone. "Get me Steele," I said. "Tell him to start the paperwork. I want them out of my house before the sun goes down." James Steele picked up the phone on the first ring. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was feeling. He simply said, "I am ready when you are, Mr. Cross." That is why I pay James Steele $500 an hour. He does not waste time with pleasantries when there is work to be done. He is a shark in a 3-piece suit, the kind of lawyer who scares other lawyers just by walking into the room. And right now, he was the only person in the world I trusted to execute the final phase of my plan. I adjusted the hospital bed, wincing, as the movement pulled at the IV line in my arm. The adrenaline from the confrontation with Patrick was fading, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The police had taken care of the criminal charges. Patrick and Megan were currently being booked at the county jail, trading their designer clothes for orange jumpsuits. But prison was too easy. Prison gives you 3 meals a day and a roof over your head. I wanted them to understand what it truly meant to have nothing. I wanted them to feel the cold wind of absolute poverty. Execute the scorched earth protocol, James. I said, my voice raspy but firm. Consider it done, Steele replied. I have the files open in front of me. Do you want to review the assets before I pull the trigger? Yes, I said. Read them to me. I want to hear it. I needed to hear it. I needed to remind myself of the empire I had built in the shadows, the safety net I had woven for a son who had tried to cut the strings. Patrick thought I was a retired union negotiator living on a fixed pension. He thought my biggest asset was the house he grew up in. He had no idea. He didn't know that for 30 years I hadn't just been negotiating contracts for workers. I had been investing every bonus, every consultation fee, every settlement check into a diversified portfolio, hidden behind a maze of shell companies. Steele cleared his throat. Item 1. The residential property located at 4500 Oak Street, currently occupied by Patrick and Megan Cross. Patrick thinks he owns that house, I said. He thinks he pays the mortgage to a private lender in Chicago. He does, Steele corrected. But the private lender is Cross Holdings LLC. You own the note, Bernie. You have owned it for 5 years. When he missed those 3 payments last year, you told me to let it slide. You told me to give him a grace period. I closed my eyes. I remembered that. Patrick had come to me crying about cash flow, about bad luck. I had forgiven the interest. I had let him stay. I had subsidized his lifestyle while he plotted my death. Foreclose, I said. Call the default. He is in violation of the moral turpitude clause. I had you bury in the fine print. Conviction or arrest for a felony triggers immediate acceleration of the debt. The clause is enforceable. Steele confirmed. I will have the eviction notice posted on the door within the hour. By the time they make bail, if they make bail, their keys won't work. The locks will be changed. Their clothes will be in bags on the curb. Good, I said. What is next? Item 2, Steele continued. The commercial property at 12 Industrial Way. The auto body shop. Patrick's pride and joy. The business, he claimed, was his ticket to the big time. He walked around that shop like a king, barking orders at mechanics, buying top-of-the-line tools he didn't know how to use. He bragged to everyone that he was the sole proprietor. He leases the land, I said. From Summit Properties, Steele said, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of your trust. The lease is month to month, Bernie. You never gave him a long-term contract. You said he needed to earn it. He didn't earn it, I said. Terminate the lease. Effective immediately. I can cite the use of the premises for illegal activities if we find any evidence of gambling on site, Steele suggested. Or I can just use the 30-day notice clause for no cause. Use the no cause, I said. It hurts more. Tell him the landlord has decided to repurpose the land. Tell him he has 48 hours to vacate the equipment, or it becomes property of the landlord. I imagined Patrick's face when he realized his business. His identity was evaporating into thin air. He wouldn't just be unemployed. He would be unmoored. Item 3, Steele said, the tone of his voice shifting slightly. The vehicles. Ah, yes. The vehicles. Patrick drove a $90,000 Range Rover. Megan drove a luxury sedan. They flaunted those cars at church at the country club. They couldn't afford at the family gatherings where they looked down their noses at my 10-year-old Ford truck. They told everyone they had leased them through a high-end corporate fleet program. They did, I said. My fleet program. I had set up the leasing company years ago as a tax shelter for my consulting income. I had allowed Patrick to lease the cars at a fraction of the market rate, absorbing the loss myself because I wanted him to feel successful. I wanted him to have the things I never cared about. Report them stolen, I said. Steele paused. Stolen, Bernie. That is aggressive. Technically, they are just in breach of lease. They used those cars to drive to the hardware store to buy the antifreeze. I said, the memory of the poison burning in my gut. They used those cars to transport the notary to my deathbed. That is unauthorized use. That is commission of a felony using company property. Revoke the lease retroactively. Report them as stolen. If they try to get into those cars in the police station parking lot, I want the alarms to go off. I want them arrested again for grand theft auto. Understood, Steele said. I will flag the VINs in the national database immediately. There was a silence on the line. I could hear Steele typing furiously. I looked out the window of my hospital room. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The world was turning indifferent to my tragedy, but I was rewriting my own orbit. Is there anything else, James? I asked. There is the matter of the liquid assets, Steele said. The accounts they tried to access. The $2.2 million in the Cayman Trust. That money was supposed to be his inheritance, I whispered. I never touched it. I lived on my pension. I drove my old truck. I clipped coupons. I let them think I was a simple man with simple means because I wanted that money to be a surprise. I wanted to leave them a legacy that would set them up for life. I wanted to be the hero one last time from beyond the grave. They didn't want a legacy, Bernie Steele said gently. They wanted a payday. Secure it, I said. Move it all, every cent. Transfer the funds to the holding company account. Then create a new trust, beneficiary Steele asked. Not Patrick, I said. Not Megan. And not any future children they might have. The poison runs too deep. I thought about the young men and women I had met over the years, the apprentices in the union halls, the kids who worked 2 jobs to pay for trade school, the ones who had calluses on their hands and hope in their eyes. Set up a scholarship fund, I said. For children of union workers injured on the job, full rides, trade school or college. Call it the Bernard Cross Second Chance Fund. Done, Steele said. And Bernie? Yes. What about the personal items, the furniture in the house, the jewelry? I thought about my wife's wedding ring. I thought about the grandfather clock in the hall. I thought about the family photos. Put it in storage, I said, except for one thing. What is that? The dining room table, I said. The one my father built. The one they smashed the cake on. Yes, burn it, I said. I never want to see it again. Copy that, Steele said. I hung up the phone. It was done. In the span of a 10-minute phone call, I had stripped my son of everything he thought he owned. He would walk out of jail if he made bail into a world where he had no home, no car, no job, and no father. I lay back in the bed. The physical pain was still there, a constant companion, but the weight on my chest was gone. I had cut the anchor. I was adrift, but I was free. Dr. Larson knocked on the doorframe. He was holding a clipboard. How are you holding up, Bernie? He asked. I am lighter, Eric, I said. About 200 pounds of dead weight lighter. He checked my vitals. Your blood pressure is down. That is good. The chelation therapy for the heavy metals will start in an hour. It is going to be rough. You are going to feel like you have the flu for a week. I can handle it, I said. I have handled worse. Larson looked at me. You know, most people would be broken by this, to find out their own flesh and blood. I looked at the X-ray on the wall, the white lines on my bones, the map of my survival. They didn't break me, Eric, I said. They just revealed what I was made of. They thought they were poisoning an old man. They forgot they were poisoning a man who spent 40 years fighting for every inch of ground he ever stood on. Larson smiled. A tired, genuine smile. Get some rest, Bernie. You have a long road ahead. I closed my eyes. The road was long, yes, but for the first time in a long time I knew exactly where I was going. I was going to live. And I was going to live well. Because living well, as they say, is the best revenge. But watching your enemies destroy themselves, that is a close second. I lay in the dark, the hospital room humming with the quiet, mechanical life of the ICU, but my attention was focused entirely on the small, glowing rectangle of my phone screen. The morphine had taken the edge off the physical pain, leaving my mind sharp and cold like a blade kept in ice. I had the app open, the feed streaming live from the cameras hidden in the house my son thought he owned. It was time to watch the rats find the cheese. I checked the timestamp on the video feed. 10:45 p.m. Just an hour after Dr. Larson had delivered the news to Patrick that I was in a deep coma with a bleak prognosis. I expected to see somber faces. I expected to see perhaps a flicker of guilt, or at least the performative sadness they usually wore so well. Instead, I saw a party. The camera in the den showed Patrick pacing the floor, but there was a bounce in his step I hadn't seen in years. He was holding a bottle of my vintage whiskey, the one I had been saving for his 40th birthday, a milestone he would now celebrate in a cell. He wasn't using a coaster. He slammed the bottle down on the antique mahogany desk, the wood groaning under the abuse. Megan was there too, curled up in my leather reading chair like a satisfied cat. She was scrolling through her phone, probably looking up vacation spots or luxury handbags. "He is actually going to do it," Patrick said, his voice tinny through the phone's speaker, but clear enough to make out every word. "He is actually going to die. I mean, did you hear the nurse? Massive swelling? Unresponsive. Nature is finally taking its course. Nature had nothing to do with it, you idiot." Megan laughed, tossing her phone onto the ottoman. It was the ethylene glycol. And the cake. Mostly the cake. But who cares how we got here? The point is, we are at the finish line. I watched as Patrick took a long swig from the bottle, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the shelves, the cabinets, the walls. It was the look of a man who was already spending money he didn't have. "We need to find the policy," he said. "And the deed. If he kicks the bucket tonight, I want to be at the bank the second they open." Vinny called again. He said if he doesn't see cash by Friday, he is going to send a crew to the shop. Megan sat up, her eyes narrowing. "Don't worry about Vinny," she said. "Once we show him the death certificate, he will give us a grace period. He knows we are good for it. The house alone covers the debt." But Patrick wasn't listening. He was walking toward the fireplace, toward the large oil painting of the Detroit skyline that hung above the mantel. I felt a surge of anticipation. He was going for the safe. I had known for a long time that Patrick knew the combination. He thought he was clever spying on me a year ago when I had opened it to put away my passport. He didn't know that I had seen his reflection in the glass of the bookcase. He didn't know that I had left the combination unchanged, 04-12-50, his mother's birthday specifically for this moment. "I bet he keeps the good stuff in here," Patrick muttered, gripping the frame of the painting and swinging it away from the wall. Megan got up and stood behind him, her greed practically radiating off the screen. "Open it," she whispered. Patrick spun the dial. Left, right, left. The heavy click of the tumblers falling into place was audible even over the microphone. He pulled the handle down, and the heavy steel door swung open. I held my breath. This was the pivot point. If they found nothing, they might get suspicious. They might panic and run. But I hadn't left it empty. Patrick reached inside and pulled out a metal lockbox. He rattled it. It was heavy. cash? Megan asked, leaning over his shoulder. Patrick pried the lid open. It wasn't locked. Inside, I had stacked about $5,000 in hundreds, my emergency fund. It was enough to make them feel like they had won, but not enough to solve their problems. $5,000, maybe, Patrick said, thumbing through the bills. He sounded disappointed. This doesn't even cover the interest on the loan. Keep looking, Megan hissed. There has to be more. He worked for 40 years, Patrick. He didn't spend a dime on himself. Where is it? Patrick reached back into the safe. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. It looked old, official. I had spent 3 nights preparing it carefully, forging entries that dated back 15 years, creating a paper trail for a fortune that existed only in ink and imagination. What is that? Megan asked. Patrick opened the book. He scanned the first few pages, his brow furrowing. Then he flipped to the back to the final balance sheet I had updated just last week. His eyes went wide. He froze, staring at the page as if it were a burning bush. No way, he whispered. No freaking way. Megan snatched the book from his hands. She looked at the number at the bottom of the column. She gasped a sharp, ugly sound. 2.2 million, she read aloud, her voice trembling. Cayman Islands Trust, blind beneficiary. She looked at Patrick, her face pale with shock. He has $2 million, she screeched. He has $2 million sitting in an offshore account, and he let us live like this. He let us drown in debt while he sat on a dragon's hoard. The anger in her voice was genuine. It was the indignation of the parasite realizing the host had more blood than it was sharing. Patrick grabbed the book back. Look at the dates, he said, pointing a shaking finger at the page. Deposits every quarter. Union consulting fees. Settlements. He was skimming Megan. The old man was dirty. I almost laughed. I had never taken a dirty dime in my life. Those entries were fiction, a story woven to appeal to Patrick's own corrupt nature. He believed it because it was exactly what he would have done. It doesn't matter where it came from, Megan said, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. It matters who gets it. Is there a beneficiary listed? Patrick flipped to the front of the binder. It says, Trustee Bernard Cross. It says, transferable upon death to designated heir or via power of attorney. He looked up at Megan. The realization hit them both at the same time. If he dies without signing this over, Megan said, her mind racing. It goes into probate. The government will see it. They will tax it. They might even seize it if they think it is illegal funds. We can't let that happen. We need access now, Patrick said, before he dies. But he is in a coma, Megan said. Patrick paced the room, the ledger clutched to his chest. We need his signature, he said. We need him to sign a transfer order, or a power of attorney. He won't wake up, Bull. Megan reminded him. The doctor said. I don't care what the doctor said, Patrick shouted. We need that money. Vinny is going to kill me, Megan. He stopped pacing. He looked at the safe again. He reached in and pulled out one last document I had planted. A blank power of attorney form, standard issue, already filled out with his name, as the agent just missing the signature and the notary stamp. Look, he said, holding up the paper. He must have been planning to sign it. He must have known he was getting sick. He wasn't getting sick, you idiot. We were poisoning him, Megan snapped. But that doesn't matter. We have the form. We just need the signature. They stared at each other. I could see the wheels turning. I could see the moral event horizon approaching, and I watched them cross it without even blinking. We go to the hospital, Patrick said. Tomorrow morning. We tell them we need to say our goodbyes. We bring Polly. Polly the pen, Megan asked. The forger. He is a notary too, Patrick said. He will stamp anything for $500. We get Polly in the room. We put the pen in Dad's hand. We guide it. He is out cold, Megan. He won't know the difference. We get the signature, Paulie stamps it, and we transfer the funds before his heart stops beating. Megan smiled. It was a cold, cruel smile. $2 million, she whispered. We are going to be rich, Patrick. Finally. Patrick poured himself another drink, his hand shaking with excitement. To the old man, he said, raising the glass to the empty room. Thanks for the nest egg, Dad. Sorry you won't be around to spend it. I watched them drink. I watched them high-five. I watched them stuff the cash from the box into their pockets, unable to resist even the small change. They had swallowed the bait. Hook, line, and sinker. They weren't just greedy. They were arrogant. They believed so fully in their own narrative that I was a helpless, senile, dying old man that they couldn't conceive of a trap. They saw the cheese, but they didn't see the spring. I turned off the phone screen. The room plunged back into darkness. I lay there listening to the beep of the heart monitor. My heart rate was steady. My hands were still. They were coming tomorrow. They were bringing a forger. They were going to try to rob a man they thought was comatose. It was perfect. It wasn't just attempted murder anymore. It was conspiracy. It was fraud. It was a criminal enterprise. When they walked into this room tomorrow, they wouldn't just be walking into a hospital. They would be walking into a federal indictment. I closed my eyes and let the morphine pull me down into sleep. I needed the rest. I had a big role to play in the morning. I had to be the dying victim one last time before I rose from the dead to bury them. 3 days. That was how long Dr. Larson kept me in the twilight zone of the ICU, buying time for the heavy metals to leach out of my blood while the legal team built the cage around my son. When the discharge papers were finally signed, I wasn't walking out. I was being wheeled out, strapped into a transport chair, my head lolling to the side, a line of drool carefully engineered at the corner of my mouth. I had to look like a man who had already left the building, leaving only the lights on. Dr. Larson had played his part perfectly. He told Patrick that my condition had stabilized, but my cognitive functions were gone. He told them I was terminal, that it was only a matter of time, and that I would be more comfortable at home. It was the bait they couldn't resist. At the hospital there were witnesses, cameras, nurses. At home there was only them, me, and the secrets they thought were safe. The medical transport team that loaded me into the back of the ambulance wasn't from the hospital. The driver was Detective Miller. The large, silent orderly adjusting my blankets was Sergeant Kowalski. They were plainclothes wired for sound and carrying concealed weapons under their scrubs. "Showtime, Bernie," Miller whispered as he locked the wheelchair brakes in the back of the van. "Remember, don't break character until I give the signal. We need them to commit. We need the pen in your hand." I blinked once. Yes. The ride to the house was short, but every bump in the road sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. The chelation therapy was working, stripping the poison from my bones, but it left me feeling hollowed out, scraped clean. It made the act easier. I didn't have to pretend to be weak. I was weak, but my mind was a fortress. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw them. Patrick and Megan were standing on the porch. They weren't wearing black. They were dressed casually, like a couple expecting a furniture delivery, not their dying father. Patrick was holding a beer. Megan was checking her watch. Miller opened the back doors. The sunlight hit me harsh and unforgiving. "Careful with him," Patrick called out, walking down the driveway. He didn't sound concerned. He sounded like a man worrying about scratching the paint on a car he was about to sell. "The doctor said he's fragile." "We got him," Miller grunted, lowering the lift. They wheeled me up the path. I kept my eyes unfocused, staring at a point somewhere past Patrick's left ear. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I felt Patrick lean in close. I smelled the stale alcohol and the nervous sweat. "Hey, Dad," he said loudly, performing for the orderlies. "Welcome home. We're going to take good care of you." Then he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. "For about 2 days, you old vegetable. Then it's lights out." I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I let him think I was gone. They wheeled me into the living room. It was exactly as I had left it, except the stain on the floor where I had bled was gone scrubbed clean. They had set up a hospital bed in the center of the room, displacing my favorite armchair. It was a rental, cheap and creaky. "Right here is fine," Megan directed, pointing to the bed. "We can handle him from here. You guys can go." Miller hesitated. "Ma'am, we usually get the patient settled, check the vitals." "We know how to check vitals." Megan snapped, her facade cracking just a little. "We are family. We want our privacy. Please just leave." She was anxious. She wanted the witnesses gone. She wanted access to the checkbook. Miller looked at me. I gave the microscopic nod we had agreed upon. "Go. Let them think they're safe." "All right, folks," Miller said. "Call us if there are any changes. He's not really there anymore, so don't expect much." "We know," Patrick said, practically shoving Miller toward the door. "Thanks for the ride." The door closed. The lock clicked. The silence that filled the room was heavy, thick with malice. I lay on the rental bed, staring at the ceiling fan. I heard the distinct sound of a deadbolt sliding home. "Finally," Megan exhaled. Her voice changed instantly. The sweet, concerned daughter-in-law vanished. In her place was the predator. "God, he smells like antiseptic, an old man. It's disgusting." "He's a $2 million lottery ticket, Megan," Patrick said. "I don't care if he smells like a sewer. Get the bag." I heard the zipper of a laptop bag. I heard papers shuffling. Megan walked into my line of sight. She looked down at me with pure contempt. She waved a hand in front of my face. I didn't blink. "Lights are on, nobody's home," she sneered. "Larson was right. His brain is mush. The antifreeze really did a number on him." "Good," Patrick said, walking over with a clipboard. "Makes this easier. No fighting, no moralizing speeches about honest work and union pride, just a signature." He placed the clipboard on my chest. It was heavy. I could feel the heat of his hand through the thin hospital gown. "Okay, Dad," he said, his voice mocking. "Time to sign your report card. Time to give your loving son the keys to the kingdom." He grabbed my right hand. His grip was rough, careless. He jammed a pen into my fingers. My hand was limp, unresponsive. I let him manipulate it. I let him mold my fingers around the barrel of the pen. "He's not gripping it," Patrick complained. "His hand is like a dead fish." "Make him grip it," Megan hissed. "Pinch him, wake him up just enough to reflex." Patrick dug his thumbnail into the soft flesh between my thumb and forefinger. It hurt. A sharp, stinging pain. My hand twitched reflexively, tightening around the pen. "There," Patrick said. "Got it." He guided my hand toward the paper. "This is the power of attorney," he narrated, as if talking to a child. "This gives me control of the bank accounts, the house, the offshore trust, and..." He flipped the page. "This is the do not resuscitate order, and the palliative care directive. This one says no food, no water, just morphine until you drift away." He laughed. A short, ugly bark. "We're going to make you comfortable, Dad. Very comfortable. And very, very quiet." The tip of the pen touched the paper. I could feel the vibration of his hand guiding mine. He was starting to form the B of my name. This was the moment. The line in the sand. I didn't just stop. I reversed the flow. I clamped my fingers down on the pen, hard. The plastic barrel creaked under the pressure. I locked my wrist. Patrick tried to move my hand to finish the loop of the B. He couldn't. My hand was an anchor. "What the..." he muttered. Let go, Dad. He pulled harder. I didn't budge. I slowly turned my head. My neck cracked a loud pop in the silent room. I shifted my gaze from the ceiling fan to my son's face. I focused. I let the vegetable mask fall away. I put 40 years of negotiation, 40 years of staring down thugs and strikebreakers into one look. Patrick froze. He saw my eyes. They weren't empty. They were burning. Dad, he whispered. The color drained from his face faster than water from a tub. I opened my mouth. My voice was rusty, unused for 3 days, but it worked. You're holding the pen wrong, son, I rasped. Patrick jumped back as if he had been electrocuted. The clipboard clattered to the floor. The pen rolled under the bed. He spoke, Patrick screamed, backing into the coffee table. Megan, he spoke. Megan spun around from the window where she had been watching the street. What? That's impossible. He's brain dead. I sat up. The motors of the hospital bed whined, assisting me, but I pulled myself upright with my own core strength. I ripped the pulse ox sensor off my finger. The monitor flatlined with a high-pitched whine. Turn that damn thing off, I growled. Megan stared at me, her mouth hanging open. She looked from me to Patrick, her eyes wide with terror. You said he was a vegetable, she shrieked at Patrick. You said the doctor promised. I don't know, Patrick stammered. He was shaking. Dad, are you okay? I swung my legs over the side of the bed. My feet hit the floor. I stood up. I was shaky, yes. I was in pain, yes. But I was standing, and I was tall. Am I okay? I repeated, taking a slow, menacing step toward them. That's a complicated question, Patrick. Physically, I'm full of heavy metals. My face is held together with titanium screws. My kidneys are working overtime to filter out the antifreeze you put in my morning blend. Megan gasped. She backed up until she hit the wall. He knows, she whispered. Oh my God, Patrick, he knows about the antifreeze. I know about the antifreeze, I said, taking another step. I know about the arsenic. I know about the cake. I know about the loan shark. And I know about the $2 million you think you found in the safe. Patrick looked at the open safe behind the painting. Then he looked back at me. You set us up, he realized. The horror on his face was absolute. The ledger, the money, it was a trap. It was a honeypot, I said. And you two are the flies, and you just landed right in the sticky stuff. Patrick's fear suddenly morphed into desperation. He looked at the door. He looked at me. He realized there were no police in the room, just a frail old man. He reached into his pocket. I knew what he was reaching for. A knife, a gun, or maybe just the sheer physical strength of a younger man against an older one. You're alone, Dad, he said, his voice dropping to a growl. You played a good game, but you made one mistake. You came home. Nobody knows you're awake. If you die now, it's still just a tragic complication. He took a step toward me, hands curling into fists. Finish him, Patrick, Megan yelled. Do it now. I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I just smiled. It was the smile of a man who had already won. I'm not alone, Patrick, I said softly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control. I pressed the button. The front door exploded inward. It wasn't a kick. It was a battering ram. The wood splintered and flew across the room. Police, get on the ground now! The room filled with black uniforms. Detective Miller was the first one through the breach, his service weapon drawn and leveled at Patrick's chest. Patrick, cross, Miller shouted. Drop to your knees, hands behind your head. Patrick froze. He looked at the gun. He looked at me. He looked at the ruin of his life. He dropped to his knees. He started to cry. It wasn't a cry of remorse. It was the pathetic mewling cry of a bully who had finally met a bigger stick. Megan tried to run for the back door. She made it 2 steps before Sergeant Kowalski tackled her. She hit the floor hard, screaming obscenities. I watched them. I watched as they were cuffed. I watched as their rights were read to them in my living room. Miller walked over to me. He lowered his gun. "You okay, Mr. Cross?" he asked. I looked at my son face down on the carpet, sobbing into the fibers. "I'm fine, Detective," I said, "just taking out the trash." I stood over my son, the man who had spent the last 3 months trying to erase me from the earth, and watched as the reality of his new life settled onto his shoulders like a lead vest. The room was crowded with uniforms, the air thick with the static of police radios and the smell of fear. But for a moment, it felt like there were only 3 of us. Me, the father who refused to die, and them, the children who had dug 2 graves and fallen into both. Detective Miller holstered his weapon and signaled for his officers to haul them up. Patrick was weeping openly now, a pathetic snot-nosed sound that grated on my nerves. Megan was silent, her face a mask of shock, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for a lawyer or a trapdoor. "Wait," I said. My voice was raspy, the heavy metals still clinging to my vocal cords, but it cut through the noise of the room. "Don't take them yet." Miller looked at me. He nodded once. He knew I needed this. He knew a negotiator doesn't leave the table until the terms are fully understood. I walked over to the kitchen counter. My legs were steady. The adrenaline was a powerful drug stronger than the poison they had fed me. I saw the silver coffee canister sitting there, the one Megan had filled with her special blend. I popped the lid. The smell wafted up rich Arabica with that faint cloying undercurrent of bitter almonds. I picked up the canister and walked back to where Megan was kneeling, her hands cuffed behind her back. I crouched down, ignoring the protest of my stiff joints until we were eye to eye. "You always made it a little too sweet, Megan," I said softly. I held the canister out so she could smell it. "That was your mistake. You thought the sugar would hide the chemical burn. But you forgot something. I worked in chemical plants for 15 years. I know what cyanide precursors and ethylene glycol smell like." Megan flinched away from the canister as if it contained a viper. I didn't," she stammered. "Save it," I said, standing up and handing the canister to a forensic technician who was waiting with an evidence bag. "That isn't coffee. That is a Class A felony. And that almond aftertaste you were so proud of, that is going to be the flavor of the next 20 years of your life." Patrick looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "Dad, please." "I didn't know. She told me it was just supplements. She said it was holistic medicine." I looked at him. The lie was so lazy it was insulting. "You didn't know," I repeated. I turned to Dr. Larson, who was standing by the door holding a large manila envelope. "Eric, show him." Larson walked forward. He didn't say a word. He just pulled out the large acetate sheet of my X-ray and held it up against the window, letting the afternoon sun illuminate the grisly details of my skeleton. "Look at the wrist, Patrick," I said, pointing to the ghostly image of my radius. "See those white lines? Those are called lead lines. That is where the poison settled into the bone matrix because my body was trying to filter it out and failing. There are 3 of them. 3 months. 3 distinct doses." Larson spoke, then his voice clinical and cold. "These lines don't appear by accident, Patrick. And they certainly don't come from holistic supplements. This is the result of chronic high-level exposure to heavy metals. You watched your father shake. You watched him go blind. And you didn't call a doctor. You called a loan shark." Patrick stared at the X-ray. He couldn't look away. The physical evidence of his cruelty was glowing in the sunlight. "I didn't mean for it to hurt," he whispered. "That is the worst part," I said. You didn't care if it hurt or not. You just wanted it to be fast. I turned away from them. I was done with the emotional audit. It was time for the financial foreclosure. There is one more person you need to meet, I said. I nodded to the open front door. James Steele walked in. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Patrick's car. He was carrying a leather briefcase. He looked out of place in my modest living room, like a shark in a goldfish bowl. "Who is that?" Megan asked, her voice trembling. "This is Mr. Steele," I said, "my attorney, and the trustee of the estate you tried to steal." Steele didn't smile. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. He walked over to Patrick and held them up so he could read the bold print at the top. "Notice of foreclosure," Steele read, "and notice of eviction." Patrick blinked, confused. "Foreclosure? But we pay the mortgage to a private lender. We have a grace period." "You pay the mortgage to Cross Holdings, LLC," Steele said, "which is a shell company solely owned by your father. You haven't paid rent in 4 months, Patrick." Bernie let it slide. "But as of this morning, the owner has exercised his right to accelerate the debt due to criminal activity on the premises." Steele dropped the paper on the floor in front of Patrick's knees. "You are trespassing, Patrick. This isn't your house. It never was." "But—" "The shop," Patrick stammered. "My business." "Seized," Steele said, dropping another paper. "Equipment liquidated to cover back rent. The locks were changed an hour ago. Your mechanics have been sent home." Patrick looked like he had been punched in the gut. Everything he identified with his house, his business, his status, was evaporating in real time. "And the cars?" Steele asked, looking at Miller. Detective Miller stepped forward. "We ran the plates on the Range Rover and the sedan in the driveway. They came back as stolen." "Stolen?" Megan shrieked. "We leased those." "You leased them from your father's fleet company," I corrected. "And the lease agreement clearly states that using the vehicles in the commission of a felony voids the contract and reverts ownership immediately. You drove that car to buy the poison Megan. You drove it to bring the forger here. That makes it a getaway car." Miller nodded. "Grand theft auto. Add it to the list." Megan slumped against the wall, defeated. She looked at Patrick with pure hatred. "You said he was senile," she hissed. "You said he was a pushover. You said he had millions stashed away and he was too stupid to spend it." "I did have millions stashed away," I said. I walked over to the safe behind the painting. It was still open, the fake ledger sitting where they had left it. $2.2 million, I said. "I saved it for 30 years. I drove a beat-up truck and clipped coupons so that I could leave you a legacy. I wanted you to have the freedom I never had." I picked up the ledger and ripped the page with the balance out. I crumpled it up and tossed it at Patrick. "But you didn't want a legacy. You wanted a payout. So I moved it. Moved it where," Patrick asked, his voice cracking. "To a place where it will actually do some good," I said. "The Bernard Cross Second Chance Fund. It is going to put kids through trade school. Kids who know the value of an honest day's work. Kids who wouldn't poison their father for a down payment on a boat." "You gave it away," Patrick screamed. "You gave my money away." "It was never your money, son," I said. "It was my life, and you tried to take it. So now I am taking it back." I looked at Miller. "Get them out of here, detective. I have a lot of cleaning to do." Miller signaled his officers. They grabbed Patrick and Megan by the arms and hauled them to their feet. Patrick struggled, digging his heels into the carpet. "Dad," he yelled. "Dad, you can't do this. I am your flesh and blood. You can't leave me with nothing." I looked at him one last time. I looked at the boy I had raised, and I saw only a stranger. "I didn't leave you with nothing, Patrick," I said coldly. "I left you with your life. which is more than you were going to leave me. They dragged them out the door. I heard Megan screaming obscenities at Patrick as they were shoved into the back of the squad cars. I heard the neighbors coming out onto their lawns to watch the spectacle. The sirens wailed a mournful sound that faded into the distance, taking the toxicity of my life with them. The room was suddenly very quiet. Dr. Larson packed up his x-rays. Steele closed his briefcase. "Are you okay, Mr.?" Cross Steele asked. I looked around the living room. It was a mess. The rental bed was an eyesore. The floor was scuffed. The air still smelled of fear and betrayal. But it was my house. Again. "I am fine, James," I said. I walked over to the window and watched the last police cruiser turn the corner. "Send the cleaning crew tomorrow," I said. "I want everything they touched gone. The furniture, the rugs, the curtains. Burn it all." "Consider it done," Steele said. He and Larson left, closing the door softly behind them. I was alone. My body ached. My face was a mask of bruises. I was 73 years old, and I was an orphan of my own making. But as I stood there in the silence, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain. It was a heartbeat. Strong, steady, unbroken. I walked to the kitchen. I poured the coffee beans from the canister into the trash compactor. I ran it until I heard the crunch of the beans turning to dust. Then I went to the fridge. I took out a bottle of water. I cracked the seal. I drank. It tasted like water. Clean, cold, safe. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a free man. And for the first time in months, the future didn't look like a dark tunnel. It looked like a blank page. And I had the pen. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut is distinct. It is a mechanical final sound, like a steel door slamming on a future that no longer exists. I watched from the edge of my hospital bed as Detective Miller tightened the metal loops around Patrick's wrists. My son was face down on the carpet, his cheek pressed into the fibers, his expensive Italian suit jacket pulled tight across his shoulders. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was just vibrating with shock. Megan was already upright, being marched toward the door by two uniformed officers. She was screaming a high-pitched feral sound about entrapment and lawyers, but no one was listening. The neighbors were likely gathering on the lawn by now, drawn by the lights and the noise. They were about to get a show they would talk about for 20 years. Patrick Cross Miller said, his voice flat and bored, reciting the words he had said 1,000 times before. "You are under arrest for the attempted first-degree murder of Bernard Cross. You are also charged with elder abuse, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit grand theft." "Attempted murder," Patrick choked out, spitting carpet fibers. "It wasn't murder. It was assisted living. He was sick. We were helping him. You were feeding him antifreeze," Patrick Miller said, yanking him up to his feet. "We found the receipt in your car. We found the search history on your laptop. How long does ethylene glycol take to kill a 70-year-old male? You weren't helping him. You were hunting him." Miller shoved Patrick toward the door. Patrick stumbled, his eyes wild. He looked at me. He looked at the room. He looked at the life he thought he had secured. "You can't take me," he yelled, digging his heels in. "This is my house. I have rights. You can't arrest a man in his own living room without a warrant." I didn't say a word. I just looked at James Steele. Steele stepped forward. He held a document in his hand, a thick packet of papers with a red stamp on the cover. He didn't look at Patrick with anger. He looked at him with the dispassionate gaze of an auditor closing a bankrupt account. "It is not your house," Patrick Steele said calmly. Patrick blinked, sweat dripping down his nose. "What are you talking about? I pay the mortgage. I pay the private lender in Chicago every month." Steele held up the document. "Cross Holdings, LLC," he read. "That is the private lender, Patrick. Who do you think owns Cross Holdings?" Patrick stared at the paper. He stared at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the gut. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. "You," he whispered. "I was paying you." "You were paying a shell company owned by your father," Steele corrected. "And you haven't paid in 4 months. You are in default. But that doesn't matter anymore. Because of the moral turpitude clause in the loan agreement, a clause you signed without reading your arrest triggers an immediate foreclosure." Steele dropped the papers at Patrick's feet. "The property has been seized, Patrick. The locks were changed electronically 5 minutes ago. Your key codes no longer work. You are trespassing on private property owned by the Bernard Cross Revocable Trust." Patrick looked around the room as if the walls were melting. The house, the equity, the $400,000 he thought was his safety net. It was all smoke. And the shop, Patrick asked, his voice trembling. "My tools, my inventory liquidated," Steele said. "Summit Properties evicted your business at 9 a.m. this morning. The equipment is being auctioned to cover back rent. You own nothing, Patrick. The clothes on your back are the only assets you have left. And honestly, I am looking into repossessing the suit, because I think you put it on your father's credit card." Patrick's knees gave out. Miller had to hold him up by the armpits. The reality of his situation finally pierced the delusion. He wasn't just going to prison. He was going to prison as a pauper. There was no money for a high-end defense attorney. There was no bail money. There was no home to return to. He looked at me. His eyes were wide, wet, and terrified. "Dad," he pleaded. "Dad, you can't leave me with nothing. I am your son." I looked at him. I saw the greed that had replaced his soul. "I am not the one who did this, Patrick," I said coldly. Patrick's face twisted. The fear turned into ugly, desperate rage. He spun his head toward the door where Megan was being held. "It was her," he screamed, his voice cracking. "It was Megan. She bought the poison. She made the coffee. She told me you were dying anyway. I just wanted to wait. She forced me." Megan stopped struggling. She turned back, her face a mask of pure hatred. "You spineless coward," she shrieked. "You were the one who researched the dosage. You were the one who wanted to push him down the stairs. Don't you dare put this on me," they screamed at each other, hurling accusations and confessions across the room, doing the prosecutor's job for him. Miller signaled his officers. They dragged them out the door, their voices fading into the sirens wailing outside. "Get him out of here," I said to the empty room. Miller paused at the door. He looked back at me. "We got them, Bernie. It is over." I looked at the foreclosure papers on the floor. "Not yet," I said. "I still have to clean up the mess." The red and blue lights of the police cruisers faded into the distance, swallowing the chaos and carrying away the 2 people who had turned my home into a hunting ground. I stood at the window watching until the street was empty and silent again. The neighbors lingered on their porches for a moment longer, whispering. But eventually, they too went back inside to their safe, normal lives. I did not cry. I had shed my tears in the trauma bay when I saw the white lines on my bones. Those were tears of grief for the son I thought I had. Tonight, there was no grief left. There was only the quiet, heavy satisfaction of a job finished. The negotiation was over. The contract was void. Steele and Larson stayed for a few minutes longer, offering to call a nurse or a guard, but I sent them home. I needed the silence. I needed to reclaim the space. I walked to the kitchen. The linoleum was still scuffed from the struggle, but the air felt lighter. I took a clean glass from the cabinet. I filled it with tap water. I held it up to the light, checking its clarity, a habit I would probably have for the rest of my life. I took a sip. It was cold, clean, and tasteless. It was the most delicious thing I had ever drunk. It tasted like survival. I looked around the house. It was a good house. I had paid for every brick with sweat and overtime. But it was tainted now. Every room held a memory of a lie. The kitchen where Megan poisoned my coffee. The living room where Patrick planned my funeral. The hallway where I had staged my escape. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a crime scene. I picked up my phone. I didn't call a cleaning crew. I called my broker. "It is Bernie," I said when he answered, surprised at the late hour. "Put the house on the market. Tomorrow morning. As is. No inspections. Cash buyers only. I want it gone by the end of the week." I hung up before he could ask questions. I didn't care about the price. I just wanted the closure. Then I opened the airline app on my phone. I had $2.2 million that wasn't going to be wasted on legal fees for an ungrateful son. I scrolled past the economy seats. I scrolled past business class. I selected first class. One way. To Rome. I had always promised my late wife we would see the Vatican. I was going to keep that promise alone, but I would be bringing her memory with me, not the burden of her son's greed. I sat down in my favorite chair, the one Patrick had tried to replace with a hospital bed. I looked at the blank wall where the painting used to hang. I was 73 years old. I was battered. I was bruised. But I was free. I had learned the hardest lesson a parent can learn. You cannot save people who are determined to destroy you, even if you gave them life. But you can save yourself. And that is exactly what I did. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to cut toxic family out of your life to save your own sanity, let me know in the comments. And please like and subscribe for more stories of truth and justice. Until next time, remember to watch your back, even at your own dinner table. The most painful truth Bernard faced wasn't the physical assault, but the realization that shared blood does not guarantee loyalty. We are often taught that family must be protected at all costs, yet his story serves as a stark reminder. Unconditional love should never mean unconditional tolerance of abuse. True family is built on mutual respect, not obligation or biological ties. Bernard's journey proves that it is never too late to reclaim your dignity. No matter your age, you have the absolute right to sever toxic ties and choose your own peace. Sometimes survival requires walking away from the very people you once carried. If you believe justice was truly served today, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with a toxic family member? Share your experience in the comments below. I read every single one.